in just a few more days, we'll get to witness a whole new take on the Fantastic Four family. Along with the excitement for this event, there's a lot of fear about where the MCU's struggle would stand after introducing this family. The last time we witnessed a Mr. Fantastic in the MCU, he was turned into shreds by Scarlet Witch, and fans were left divided about the ease with which Scarlet Witch killed the character. So, there's a hope that the next time we see him, Mr. Fantastic won't be knocked out with such ease. Let's take a look at everything we know about the character of Mr. Fantastic in terms of his anatomy, and how that might influence the fresh new take on the character in the upcoming Fantastic Four film. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. More than just elasticity, Mr. Fantastic. Reed Richards. Mr. Fantastic holds a special place in Marvel, and that could be understood very well through how Stan Lee talks about him. But when asked about the creation of Mr. Fantastic, Stan Lee had stated, "I liked Plastic Man. That's a great power, and nobody is using it, so I gave Reed Richards Plastic Man's power." Now, there are a lot of reasons to see the influence that DC had on Marvel and vice versa. But it's worth mentioning that over time, Mr. Fantastic has proven to be beyond the identity of a superhero who can stretch. Reed Richards is a perfect blend of scientist and superhero, someone who can delve into both aspects equally while continuing his mission to seek answers to the unknown. Ever since the cosmic rays affected him and his family, the man has undergone significant changes. Still, one thing that remains the same was his intellect, which was already beyond the ordinary. Even though he would later expand on it using his powers, we are referring to neuroplasticity, a concept that we will be discussing later. So yeah, in the vast world of Marvel, filled with superheroes, Reed is someone who has always been more than just his ability to stretch and take some crazy shapes. Tony Stark, someone who continues to have an internal battle about being more than Iron Man, said this himself about Reed. How does that stretching work? The cosmic rays gave him the ability to be elastic, and the man literally proved the vast possibilities that this mere power can unlock. He can essentially shapeshift into any physical form at will, allowing him to extend his neck, torso, and limbs to varied lengths, and thus reach distant objects and entangle his opponents. Even though there have been times when there has been a threshold to his elastic ability, it hasn't really been a fixed number, considering different circumstances have led to some interesting changes in this threshold value. So, the elastic capability is not limited to only certain parts of his body. Still, everything from his skin cells, neurons, erythrocytes, fat cells, and even bacteria has been impacted by this, and thus they all display this elastic capability. He can essentially reshape himself into any possible configuration without any significant changes to his body. But this ability also makes him sufficiently malleable, so his pliant dermis actually becomes absolutely immune to any type of puncture, allowing his cells to rebound during a strong impact. So yeah, the next time you're aiming a gun at him, you have to take into account that the bullet may come back to you. What's with the 1,500 feet limit? Even though Reed Richards has himself stated that he can stretch himself to the incredible length of 1,500 feet, there have been various cases where he has been forced to go beyond that. Now, each time this has happened, it has had an impact on Reed that caused some sort of weakness in him. So we understand why he would set a threshold limit to the extent of his elasticity. But it can get way worse because there was a time in Fantastic Four issue 22 where he stretched himself to save the people, only for him to go so thin that he tore himself, and the blood rained down on the people that he was saving. Yeah, it can become an absolutely Cronenbergian gore fest. However, the situation has become even worse when Doom managed to torture Reed while Reed was trying to stop him from using Galactus as a source of energy for Latveria. The cover art shows Doom ripping Reed's head apart as it stretches and tries to hold on, showing how brutal Doom could be once he had become the supreme ruler of Earth. Smartest man in the universe, neuroplasticity. One of the very first things that becomes clear about Reed Richards when you see him without his powers is the fact that he is a genius. According to the comics and animated shows, The man has attended almost all of the prestigious institutions, from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to Harvard. Thus, he has earned several degrees in science. There has hardly been such a scenario where the man has met someone with his level of intellect, and to be very specific, it has mostly been Victor Von Doom. Now, it seems that the effects of the cosmic radiation, the very one that had given him and his family the powers, actually ended up acting like a steroid on his intellect. The man became significantly smarter, and his intellect gained a much better grasp of the science around him, which further solidified his position as the world's most intelligent person. So yeah, as much as this man can extend and use his elasticity to such levels that would come in handy during some major face-offs, he can also extend his brain. We know that the human brain has various regions that control the multiple functions of the human body. Some control voluntary movement, while others handle basic functions such as hearing, memory, and decision-making, all while maintaining focus. Stimulating any of these can ultimately strengthen these functions and, at the same time, lead to greater growth in the way the brain performs. What does Reed do with this knowledge? He manipulates and stimulates specific parts of his brain, thereby allowing him to comprehend complex concepts and solve grave problems. And that's exactly how Reed manages to keep the Fantastic Four and the tech at the forefront of human society and save the world from some rather unbelievable threats. It does sound like a lack of creativity, considering the man had achieved a lifetime of scientific success at the mere age of 22. However, some factors demonstrate it made a significant difference. Before the effects of the power, Reed was someone who had managed to create a faster-than-light rocket, an event from Marvel Comics that would change the way things worked entirely. But by the time the powers kicked in and he turned into Mr. Fantastic, he could make inventions that could question the fabric of the universe. Even then, these creations and these inventions weren't limited to mere scientific discoveries, because he would also go on to solve some of the much smaller issues that exist for the people around him. The man actually developed a hypersonic cure for acne and later sold it to raise funds for the Fantastic Four's operations and activities. So the next time you wonder about the cheese that led to some of the most advanced tech ever, you must remember that Reed has cooked up some sort of life-changing cure. If you are left wondering how he can do this, then you must remember that he can stretch his brain to put as much effort as possible into a particular aspect of his decision-making. He can utilize his neuroplasticity to adapt to various situations by adjusting to a circumstance and allowing his cognitive functioning to evolve to a level where he can gain a better understanding of the problem at hand. He can change the shape of his brain to accommodate anything he is working on while consciously channeling his brain power into focusing on something else. You might think that it makes sense for someone not to adhere to these aspects and simply look for what's available and rely on that, considering he is a genius after all. However, there are times when you don't want to indulge in one aspect of things while trying to focus on another, whether it's related to logic or imagination. So, Reed can shut down that part of his brain and focus entirely on these things, making for an interesting way of dealing with his troubles. During the Ultimate Fantastic Four, there came a situation where Reed and Sue were investigating some sort of Atlantean carving, and there was no chance for them to get an understanding. However, Reed managed to jump right in and develop a mathematical formula that could provide a solution to the situation he was in, even though there's no way he could have done this before he had his powers. It is absolutely bizarre to imagine that a move like this could change something entirely about him, as his ability to process information is on a wholly different level. Since you know that he can develop knowledge on any topic, it behaves like some sort of mutation he can create inside his brain, and this has actually gone further than you can imagine. During the events of Earth X, a much older Mr. Fantastic from an alternate future was trying to use Cerebro to track the missing Inhumans. To do that, he managed to expand his brain's cerebrum to bring it to the level of one of the best telepaths in the Marvel Universe, Professor Xavier, and then used it to make himself almost similar to the telepathic mutant. So yeah, Reed Richards can essentially acquire new powers by harnessing the sheer level of his ability to stretch, which can cause growth or stimulation. Over the years, we've had a roster of heroes with similar abilities. Still, none have demonstrated the ability to utilize them in a manner that stimulates their brain in the same way Reed Richards did. In fact, Reed had only come to use this power later, and unlocking its full potential required him to become accustomed to various aspects of it. So his children, who would have some of these abilities from the very beginning, can clearly take this potential to a completely different level and channel even greater potential. Untapped powers that require further usage. Even though the combination of his intellect and his powers proved to be quite helpful, there have been cases where Richards has not used some of these abilities to their fullest potential. Whenever we did get to see his powers in action, it almost felt like they were still in an early, raw form of their full potential. One of the very first abilities amongst these is the ability to shapeshift, which makes perfect sense and also aligns with his elasticity. So Richards can often use his stretching capability to morph his face into someone completely different, and that does work out quite frequently. We saw some version of this in the now infamous scene from the 2005 film, where Reed ends up morphing his face into something that looks like a poor man's rendition of Wolverine's Hugh Jackman. I mean, the effort was visible, but we're all glad that the scene didn't make it into the final movie, because it didn't help that it was adding to the already terrible CGI. But even though the 2015 film has got a lot of issues, it shows a more practical take on the shapeshifting arc, where you get to see him change into Reed Richards from a completely different individual. The comic books have had more extensive use of this ability, but it only gets a lot more interesting once you realize he can manipulate his vocal cords to change his voice. The MCU has ample space for utilizing these abilities, considering impersonation is something that has been extensively employed, as seen in the case of Loki. Since we've already touched upon the idea of developing certain other mutations in his body by stimulating that body part, we have to talk about the ability that was mentioned in one of the files from S.H.I.E.L.D. dedicated to Reed Richards. It's quite clear that he has genuine consciousness spread throughout his expanded body, and that can actually come in handy when the enemy has created force fields around themselves. But if you remember the rarely used mutant Multiple Man, then you would be surprised to note that even Mr. Fantastic has the ability of mitosis. Mitosis is a process of cell duplication that results in the creation of two identical copies, allowing an individual to essentially replicate themselves by splitting into two versions. It might sound like a last-minute addition to make the superhero have a new gimmick, but that's not the case, considering that Reed can literally make multiple hands as well as expand his brain. At the same time, he can use mitosis, almost like a formality to his powers, something that chimes with the rest of his abilities. So Richards can actually split into multiple copies of himself, thus bringing a whole new chapter to his powers into play. The man has utilized it to some extent in the comics, but it hasn't appeared in the movies either, thus highlighting an ability that can do a lot more than we've witnessed this superhero do. It sounds like a really exciting take on Richards' powers, but maybe there hasn't been a solid reason to use it in a circumstance for the superhero as of yet. Fans of the character managed to witness a rendition of mitosis when Reed was able to grow multiple heads and limbs to save his family. So this event took place in a 4D space, a realm where the normal rules of reality can be bent according to necessity. Even the Human Torch ended up creating a duplicate of himself and nicknamed him Flamo. Gotta say though, S.H.I.E.L.D. does seem to have quite the plan when any of these superheroes go rogue, considering they have somehow managed to identify that Reed has the ability of mitosis. Richards and Xavier have been quite close in terms of helping each other out and also working together during some rather dire situations. But Richards can parallel the telepath in a much bigger way, since he can also deflect any type of telepathy by stretching his mind according to the required amount and resist the effects of telepathic attacks. The comics have given a rare insight to these abilities, but the live-action rendition of our hero hasn't worked this ability into his lore. Maybe if it did work, then the man would have had some means of going against the Scarlet Witch during the events of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, an arc where the man was literally shredded into bits. The God Power Theory. Over the years, as we examine the various events in which the Avengers and the other Marvel Universe characters have utilized their abilities, some unexplained phenomena have always been present. You must be wondering about what kind of unexplained events we're talking about. Well, we're talking about everything from the unlimited energy source for Cyclops' laser blasts to the additional mass that Banner's body manages to acquire when he turns into the Hulk. It might sound a bit foolish to tap into these elements of a superhero, but there's a chance that Reed has managed to gather a possible explanation for all this in a manner that we couldn't have at all expected. According to his notes, ever since the accident that gave us our extra abilities, I've been trying to reconcile the high energy expenditure of each of our power sets with our seemingly unchanged unhinged individual energy intake. The most basic laws of physics make this seem impossible. At first, I suspected we were absorbing energy from the air, possibly low-level radiation, but the numbers never added up. Then I came across the research of Dr. Rachna Kul, who specialized in imperiomology, the science of superpowers. She posited that superhumans are each connected to one or more intradimensional sources of energy, which she dubbed God power. A solid theory, though I'm still unable to find that conduit in my studies of the Fantastic Four's power sets. Franklin's diminishing powers would appear to lend credence to the God power theory, as he seems to be running out of the energy needed to use his powers. If we were to believe there is a God power source, then it's possible that Franklin's connection to that source is broken. Whether or not it can be repaired depends on first proving its existence somehow. It's a fascinating theory that has been built upon various observations we've made over the years, and it deserves every reason to be explored. But the mere idea of a singular such source actually proves that there isn't a very strong difference between the mutants or the other human beings who gain their powers like Spider-Man did. It actually becomes a rather meta question, and it also changes everything that we know about these superheroes. So, a well of energies, or something that might be in the hands of some larger being from the Marvel Universe, being the primary source of all the powers that we have seen in here, makes it feel almost as if there's a dependency. I just hope that it turns out to be something like Jack Kirby, the man behind the creation of the Fantastic Four, who has appeared in the pages of the comic book. Something like the God power theory deserves a mention, considering that it might have a significant impact on the powers of Reed Richards in Marvel's future. Bonds with other Avengers. Marvel has explored storylines where the superheroes have been put through some testing times, and it's then that their bonds with the others come to shine. Take Doctor Strange, for example. Both Reed and Strange were part of the Illuminati, a group of heroes considered the smartest beings on the planet, so their bond ran quite deep, deeper than we might have expected. When Doctor Doom wanted to take another one of his moments of pride from Reed, he attacked the family and put the rest of the Fantastic Four prisoner while putting Reed's son Franklin into hell. But Doom didn't just leave Reed to be, but tested him by putting him in his vast library of knowledge, only to prove that Reed could never master the magic that could save his family. But Reed wasn't just gonna let it be, as he did take what was given to him and started working on it extensively, looking at the magic in a more analytical and scientific manner than he was used to. It was Doctor Strange who advised him not to look at it in that manner, only for Reed to unlock the potential to use the magic, and finally, he was able to save his family and rescue his son from hell. There have been various moments when Reed had to face the true potential of Asgard, with its mythology having a profound impact on the lives of people on Earth. In fact, there was a time when the Thing was possessed by the energies of a hammer that came from Asgard. It ended up putting him in a rogue mode as he went against his own family. None of the Fantastic Four could stop him, and it was finally the Asgardian god Thor who managed to subdue him. Similarly, someone with the intellect of Reed, reacting to the vast potential of Mjolnir, actually says a lot about the hammer and his powers. During the battle between Thor and Hulk King in the Empire arc, Thor flung his hammer, and Hulk King's cosmic sword eventually blocked it, and a vast energy burst took place. And Reed was absolutely amazed by this moment. Just like his bond with these other heroes, the bond with T'Challa runs quite deep too. In fact, it runs so deep that the Fantastic Four considers the Black Panther family, and even picked him as a candidate to replace Mr. Fantastic at one point. But that doesn't come close to the fact that the Black Panther took Reed along with him to Wakanda's City of the Dead, a place where the Chosen One of Wakanda go to converse with the warriors and rulers of Wakanda's past. It was here that they found the answer to the questions about the fate of Wakanda and its people during one of their testing times. Reed wasn't able to entirely comprehend what he had witnessed, but he did manage to grasp the culture of Wakanda quite a bit, and the fact that he owes a great deal to T'Challa for putting him through this experience. Council of Reeds. No, we're not referring to Rick and Morty, considering there's a clear chance that they managed to make a perfectly working parody of the concept that was brought in to represent the alternate versions of Reed Richards across the multiverse coming together. Now, each of these Reeds had their powers, and some exhibited completely different intellect and abilities that set them apart from one another. The Reeds from different realities join this council once they have managed to access a device called the Bridge, which brings them to this reality. Some tropes are quite obvious, particularly the one about the three Reeds who sit on the top of the council, with each holding on to their reality's infinity gauntlet. Even though the Reed that we follow managed to access this council, he discovers something that runs common in them except for him. All of these Reeds didn't have the chance to be with their father, Nathaniel Reed, the man who was very much responsible for shaping the Reed Richards of Earth 616 into making certain choices that proved him to be a lot more compassionate. But Reed declines any involvement in this council, much like Rick Sanchez and his Council of Ricks, once Reed realizes that he would have to sever ties with his family to join them. Later on, the Reeds managed to gain access of the 616 Reeds universe, and that's when our Reed had to team up with a lot of his enemies to go against them, against his alternate selves. Yeah, that's one story that could have gone absolutely bonkers, and to be honest, it kinda did. Even though we haven't seen the Council of Reeds, we are already aware of 3 different Reeds existing in 3 different realities, with each having reasons of their own that make them worthy of sticking around. There's another one, but there's no indication that he is in the present continuity of the MCU. Still, Miles Teller's take on Reed does have some interesting points worthy of making him a contender to be welcomed back if a council does get explored shortly. While 2 of them are probably already dead, let's hope Pedro Pascal's Reed actually makes it out of whatever doom that is headed towards them and carries the legacy of these Reeds in the MCU. Yes, it's a very meta statement. The Maker. Everything that can go wrong with Mr. Fantastic. The Maker, also known as the Ultimate Reed Richards, becomes a crucial point of discussion when examining Mr. Fantastic, as this supervillain represents the extreme potential of this character's power if things had gone completely wrong from the very beginning. But he wasn't always a villain. In fact, when he was first introduced, he was a hero, and very much the Reed that we have been used to, except in an alternate universe. Until we got to see him go through quite a few personal tragedies that, in pop culture terms, put him into the dark side, and channeled everything that could go wrong about him and his abilities. Once again, Miles Teller's version of Reed Richards did receive a version of this identity in the 2015 film, but the story ended before we could explore the darker aspects of the character. Oh, the potential. When he was turning into a threat, many of his friends reached out to him. They confronted him, considering his intellect and powers made him something that could prove quite fatal in the future. So he instantly became a major point of discussion. But it's here that we find that his primary motivation had become to find another alternate reality that he could perfect according to his own choices instead of sticking to his home dimension, which he had grown to hate. Now, in terms of his powers, this guy literally stretched beyond the general capacity that we have seen, and it was a worthy moment, as he saved Carol Danvers after the Silver Surfer dropped her. Even though he was injured due to this, he realized that it answered a lot of questions about his true potential and what he can actually do with his powers. He approached a whole new manner of channeling his neuroplasticity by organizing his internal organs in a way that would help him become much more efficient. This way, he didn't need any sleep, as the workings of his brain changed, and his body transformed his internal organs into a bacterial stack that allowed him to generate sufficient energy to fuel his body. Many aspects, such as the circulatory system or the digestive system, became optional choices, and the absence of lungs ensured that he could survive in any type of environment. Yes, that's crazy, and it just goes to show the level to which Mr. Fantastic can go if no family kept him in check. While Mr. Fantastic hasn't shown his mitosis yet, the Maker has split himself into various beings with the help of Molecule Man, and he was put into each of the different universes that the Earth 616 Reed and Franklin Richards were creating. Marvelous verdict. Even though the past few attempts at exploring the character of Reed have received varied responses from fans and critics, they have somewhat laid the groundwork for capturing the family of 4 on screen. So there's a lot at stake for the new Fantastic Four film, considering they have already decided to take a completely separate tone that will somehow connect with the rest of the MCU through the multiverse. Let's hope we get to witness these levels of Mr. Fantastic and not reduce him to the mere Plastic Man standard. Even though I don't have anything against Plastic Man, he has always been quite cool to me. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks everyone.